The Western media has never lost an opportunity to lecture and berate third world countries. This has become apparent now more than ever, especially with the adverse effects of climate change wreaking havoc. The Firangi media, particularly the BBC, the New York Times and the Guardian, have published numerous headlines and cartoons questioning the third world on how it would tackle the climate action and development dilemma. This is rather hypocritical, considering that it is the Western nations that are cumulatively the largest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions historically. Recently, the president of Guyana, Dr. Irfan Ali, has schooled a BBC reporter after being questioned regarding the country's plans to drill oil from its recently discovered oil reserves. In a heated reply to the journalist, the Guyanese president asked what gives the West the right to lecture Guyana. Let us in fact listen into that exchange.
Let's take a big picture look at what's going on here. Over the next decade, 2 decades, it is expected that there will be $150 billion worth of oil and gas extracted off your coast. It's an extraordinary figure, but think of it in practical terms. That means, according to many experts, more than 2 billion tons of carbon emissions will come from your seabed, from those reserves, and be released into the atmosphere. I don't know if you as a head of state went to the COP in Dubai.
Let me stop you right there. Let me stop you right there. Do you know that Guyana has a forest forever that is the size of England and Scotland combined? A forest that stores 19.5 gigatons of carbon, a forest that we have kept alive, a forest that we have kept alive.
Does that give you the right? Does that give you the right to release all of this carbon?
Does that give you the right to lecture us on climate change? I am going to lecture you on climate change because we have kept this forest alive that stores 19.5 gigatons of carbon that you enjoy, that the world enjoy, that you don't pay us for, that you don't value, that you don't see a value in, that the people of Guyana has kept alive. Guess what? We have the lowest deforestation rate in the world. And guess what? Even with our greatest exploration of the oil and gas resource we have now, we will still be net zero. Guyana will still be net zero. With all our exploration,
a couple of points.
Still be net zero.
Powerful words, Mr. President. But
I'm not completed as yet. I am not finished as yet. I am just not finished as yet. Because this is the hypocrisy that exists in the world. The world in the last 50 years has lost 65% of all its biodiversity. We have kept our biodiversity. Are you valuing it? Are you ready to pay for it? When is the developed world going to pay for it? Or are you in the pockets? Are you in the pockets of those who have damaged the environment? Are you in the pockets, are you and your system in the pockets of those who destroyed the environment through the Industrial Revolution and now lecturing us? Are you in their pockets? Are you paid by them? Are you paid to keep their message?
All right, we're going to talk about this, and joining us on the panel right now is Mr. Pathikrit Payan, international affairs expert. Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee, former diplomat, also joins us on the show. Surinder Singh Lali, international affairs expert, with us on the program as well. Mr. Rahul Ishwar, activist, joins us on the program as well. Rashmi Sawant, human rights activist, with us on the program as well. Ambassador Mukherjee, I'll begin with you, ma'am. Appreciate you joining us, and I hope you can hear me. Well, the Western media, ma'am, as we have a multitude of times discussed in the past, is always looking to, in fact, berate and condescend developing countries and the global south. The exchange that you saw, it gives a befitting reply to a reporter who already shows up to this interview with a premeditation to judge and accuse. But the fact of the matter is that this is something which India specifically has been accustomed to for decades now.
Yes, indeed. I'm glad that you aired that exchange because it actually shows the lingering neo-imperialist, neo-colonialist bias of this reporter, which is not surprising judging where he comes from. That bias shows up in BBC, it shows up in The Economist, it shows up in various Western journals and newspapers, which still think that they have the right to lecture us and tell us what we should do or what we should not do, considering that the country concerned has been the victim of colonialism and imperialism of slavery and indenture, I think that it was the most befitting reply. I am very proud that such a reply was given and that no quarter was given because in the past the effort always used to be to suppress our reply and to lecture to us, to summarize us and to talk down to us. So this is a very welcome development. As you rightly point out, we in India, unfortunately, have been so used to it for decades that we have learned how to give it back much faster than others have. Because also, let's not forget that we became independent in 47 when 2/3 of the world was still under colonial rule. Many of our brothers and sisters in the developing countries got their liberty and freedom later. So it took them a little bit of time to get used to the cuts and blows which we were subjected to right from 47 onwards. And so we learned to defend ourselves quicker and faster. So it's really heartening to see and hear the reply which was given. And I hope that would serve as a befitting response, not just to BBC, but to all the others who still seek to speak down to ex-colonies as if we are still under the colonial yoke. Over to you.
Pathakrit, we've been down this road, a million times before. The Western media and its inclination towards trying to condescend India and the developing world, and not rather focusing on what India has achieved or some of these countries from the global south have achieved, but in fact pulling out and pulling through some of the trenches that these countries have been trying to deal with and yet develop against all odds.
Absolutely, Vineet. What the British and many of the cohorts of British empire in the West did for centuries was cultural, political, geographical, religious invasion of other countries. Today, they cannot do invasion anymore. So what they do is basically interference. And BBC is kind of, it's part of the entire coterie. So BBC, pardon my language, but BBC is one of those pimps who actually take forward that entire legacy. Let me give you an example. One of the first president of Guyana, who was of Indian origin, was Chetty Jagan, and that person, his parents were, forcefully taken from India to Guyana to work in the plantations. When he graduated, he wanted to become a teacher, but the condition was that he can only work in the plantations, and the only way he can become a teacher is if he converts to Christianity. So that is the kind of institutionalized slavery and conversion that these British did today. It's so amazing that they keep on lecturing us. There are two kinds of things that we must keep in mind. First of all, the West in totality. 10 years back, nobody would have questioned what this BBC journalist is asking because it was so important those days. In the last 10 years, social media has brought about a fundamental change, and yet they don't want to change the West. There are 2-3 things happening. Number one, the British will not talk about slavery. The BBC will not talk about the $45 trillion that they have looted from India. And imagine the amount they have looted from all the countries who are under the British reign. It's so surprising, this BBC journalist, he must have flown down to Guyana to take the interview, and the amount of carbon emission that he must have done while flying in the plane, because the planes don't fly on electric engines. It runs on fossil fuel. The West have completely outsourced manufacturing to Asia. And then they give sermons on green energy, on climate change. If they had to do the whole manufacturing in their own backyard, today, United Kingdom would have been as polluted as China is or perhaps India is. So that is something we must never forget. Secondly, look at the end. What is the lobby that they are part of? There are two kinds of lobbies we must understand. It's not just about, they do care a damn about climate. There is this entire fossil fuel lobby who do not want additional supply to come into the market because that will restrict the price of fossil fuel. That's number one kind of lobby. And you look at the all these global hedge funds and the investment bankers of the West who control this oil trade. Number two lobby is the green energy lobby. And the green energy lobby, which they lecture about creating a green environment or clean fuel, they will never give that technology for free. And that's one of the things that India kept on talking in G20, that the developing countries have their own aspirations to take care of their own people. They cannot be restricted from the use of fossil fuel or coal, because you will not give the other kind of technology for free. Why have you kept it so expensive? Today, India is being compelled to create the entire supply chain of the solar, electricity ecosystem, because the entire pandemic showed the kind of vagaries we faced. So the West actually wants business out of green energy, nothing else. And these kind of people are simply funded. Who funds Washington Post? Who owns Washington Post? That is the question. And last thing I want to say, the British government, the BBC journalists should be asked that every time they trigger a war to ensure that the military-industrial complex is kept alive, how much carbon emission is done from that? How much carbon emission has been done in Ukraine by the war they could have avoided by preventing NATO from its needless expansion in Ukraine, by creating an enemy out of Russia, by trying to put missile systems in the backyard of Russia. That war, funded by the West, funded by United States, funded by the United Kingdom, how much emission did they create there? How much emission did they create in Iraq, in Afghanistan for futile war? You know about Afghanistan, what it is said? It took 20 years for United States, several presidents, thousands of lives to replace Taliban with Taliban. And how much did they spend? $2.5 trillion. That 90% of that $2.5 trillion went back to the military-industrial complex of the United States to fund more, war in the future. And they talk about environment. They will not talk about genocides. They will not talk about the number of people young children who died in Iraq because of sanctions. 500,000 kids in Iraq died due to sanctions, because of which they could not even buy essential medicines or generic medicines from even countries like India. And those are the buggers who talk about, humanity. It's surprising. I would rather ask you, Vinith, one day do a program of the number of famines that happened in India, not just the 1940 famine. Every famine was engineered. And this is what the West should be exposed time and again. We must do these programs frequently, because this entire concept that if somebody can speak English in a Western accent and says things that I'm concerned about the environment, and if you oppose, then you will be you will be cancelled, like Rashmi was cancelled. You will be cancelled like many others get cancelled. Please understand, the Cambridge and the Oxford for centuries legitimized colonialism and slavery. And that is what they keep on doing today. Invasion has been replaced by interference. That is why they have a problem with the rise of India, because India is becoming the voice of Global South. Because of India, which says that Europe must stop thinking that Europe's problems are the world's problems, or the world's problems are not Europe's problems.
Yeah, let me rope in Rahul Ishwar into this conversation as well. Rahul, if you're there with us.
Yes.
Rahul, this judgment that has been made about India and some of our allies and some of our brothers in the Global South by the Western media does not seem to be stopping. And in fact, the reverse is also true, Rahul. The more progress India makes, or the more progress a country which is considered to be a developing nation makes, the more accusations are hurled towards it. What do you think this is part of? Is this an agenda, to be relevant, or do you think this is a ploy to not let anybody come up?
I'm an absolute environment lover. I believe that there is no planet B and we should take care of it. But, my good friend and the earlier speaker, Pathikrat, I believe he spoke wonderfully, and he spoke for every true Indian and every true person of the Global South. I don't think anybody, in our national media could have articulated it better. He spoke with great vigor. See, this is the hypocrisy we have been continuously subjected to. He was mentioning about Iraq. What about, the lakhs of kids who were killed because of a faulty intelligence? There were not even weapons of mass destruction, and US invaded and made a mess and mockery out of it and spent trillions of dollars, killed thousands of American soldiers. So the West always had a faulty belief that they have a moral high ground. Having said that, as our PM Modi ji, beyond politics, rightly said, we should take care of environment. We have the right concern. And our view, the Bharatiya, the Indian view, is the right view. The West always has an anthropocentric view, where we have more of an earth-centric view, or a Prithvi-centric view, or an eco-centric view. We should definitely take care of it. But having said that, the human needs also should be balanced. We have to find that fine balance between economy and ecology. That is the balance we should strive. See, the Western people, they give such bhashans and gyans that sound very good for the unsuspecting here. But, as Patikrit earlier pointed out, they have a sort of duplicity. They have a sort of their own interest. They have polluted the world and they are making other people stop their development. See, Earth, the concern for the climate and the environment is a very genuine concern, and we should all have it. And I believe Modi ji has written a beautiful book also about it. So it's a genuine concern. But having said that, it should not be an excuse, a bahana, to prevent other nations from coming up, to prevent other nations from having their own policies. But this happens to be a control mechanism by the West, and that should definitely go unchecked. Especially in the past 25 to 30 years, the trillions of dollars have been spent on useless wars which achieve nothing. These trillions of dollars could have easily, spent to better the world and environment. They didn't do. So there is a sort of hypocrisy. But my humble submission would be, we Indians should be able to propose an alternative path where the developing countries, especially our African brothers and sisters who has been subjugated for so long, they can come up. Developing nations can come up. Nations like India can emerge and become a superpower. At the same point of time, balance the whole ecology, whole economy debate in a very good way, where economy will definitely prosper, but that will have minimum, the lowest of hurt to the ecological system too.
Absolutely right. Mr. Lali, I hope you can hear me. Mr.
Yes,
Lali,
sir,
you've stayed in the West. You've spent a considerable time understanding, gauging how the Western world works, and you obviously are the son of of the soil. What goes through your head when something like this is done to a country who's trying to come up to the ranks, and in return is lectured, for having oil? The Gulf countries who have funded American wars, a number of wars across the world, are never chided for the kind of pollution that they create. But on the other hand, India, Bangladesh, China, on the other hand, continue to get this flack time and again.
Thank you, Vinny. Such a pleasure and honor for me to be here. And you asked me, how do I feel? I think a lot of my sentiment was echoed when Stephen Sacker said powerful words to the Guyanese president, and the Guyanese president says, wait a minute, I am not finished yet. Exactement. The party for the West and the Western hegemony, which is dwindling, has just started. So, Vinny, it was great to see that what the Guyanese president did, he demolished the BBC journalist by actual facts and figures. It wasn't an argument which was based on rhetoric. And beneath this mindset and this hypocrisy is even far beyond just the environment issue. I mean, if I want to bring it back home, we at the United Nations, the United States, Germany, comment on the way, Kejriwal issue is being held. I mean, I don't think it is part of their brief to be commenting on any of what is going inside, as Rahul rightly said, that a lot of these countries have used, the World Banks and these financial institutions to control economies around the world. I mean, Chinese violation of human rights was the worst kept secret in the world, or so was Pakistan. But America and the Western economies totally played on their interests. I mean, what suited them was fine. What didn't suit them was fine. I mean, where is the United Nations today? When there are over 32,000, children that have died in an act of genocide by the state of Israel.
And Mr. Lali, you're familiar with what happened in Baltimore, right? There was a very objectionable cartoon
Yes.
that was released on social media with Indians inside that particular ship. People who are in fact, part of that crew, educated crew, were shown in dhotis and without shirts. And this was a meme which originated in the United States.
Yeah, Vineet, when I went there in class 6 as a student, there used to be a gang in New Jersey called the Dot Busters, and they operated from, the Jersey City area, and they simply would harm physically and Indian women because they could identify them by the dots. Vineet, yes, it's a larger plan of the way these large economies operate. I mean, they actually want to control other countries and especially the weak and the vulnerable, financially weak ones, through the narrative that they set out through these, their own funded organizations. I mean, for example, the Niger controversy, the Pannu. I mean, they are bothered about a plumber, but there have been almost 15 to 20 Indian kids across the world, especially in the US, which have died under mysterious circumstances, but I don't think they're talking about it. So yes, these are agenda-driven lobbies which want to control the world, and I'm very happy with the nimble and the deft, foreign minister that we have, who's been calling their bluff. Of course, I mean, Mr. Jaishankar is much more diplomatically and politically correct when he calls out the fakes of BBCs and other Western economies who wanted us to join their war and their Cold War problems. And we didn't want to do that because we said our interests and our middle class and our oil consumption is supreme. So I'm so happy that the party has just started, and I think with the way Modi government is heading, and we're being a face of in the global South, and even the G21. I mean, in one stroke there were, I think, about 50 some African nations which joined. So we're heading in the right direction, and sooner or later, it'll be there.
All right. Rashmi Sawant, human rights activist, also with us on the program. Rashmi, well, you've seen this partiality, right? You've seen it firsthand. Forget about geopolitics. This is something which is prevalent in schools and colleges throughout the world, and then Western media, and rather the Western socio-cultural atmosphere has not improved regardless of India's ascendance in the last decade.
Well, I think I can give a little more of a detailed account on this matter because I studied the energy systems and environmental engineering at the University of Oxford. So I do have a very, key insight into this kind of mafia that runs across the world in the name of environment, energy, climate, etc., etc. Of course, climate change is a reality, but the way they've developed a system around this phenomena is rigged in a way to, keep the West on top of things, to keep West at the helm, and to continue to subjugate the global East or the global South that they seem to call, and subjugate in a discriminatory fashion. Let me get down to one simple thing. So how did all of these Western countries become rich? They became rich by industrialization, where they burnt heaps of coal and oil and gas and etc., etc., etc. Now their economy is flourishing. So they have exported all of these kinds of manufacturing aspects to third world countries, and they're lecturing them that you need to do this using green energy, so on and so forth. And then they see that, okay, this was a thing in the past, but now we are, this climate change, so you need to stop doing this thing. But the gases, the carbon dioxide and the other noxious gases that they put in the environment to achieve that status in the globe, that so-called developed status, those gases are anthropogenic in nature. So they remain in the environment for hundreds of years. So it's not like they put it out there and, it's a closed chapter. No, the warming that we are currently experiencing is a direct result of the gas that they put there, and that effect will be experienced for another 300 years. So now we really need to start seeking reparations for the kind of effect that we are facing here in the global South as a result of the gases that they put out there in the global north, because they're still cold, but the sort of effects that's being faced, it's more acute in the global South. Second, they're trying to take away the agency from other countries to industrialize and reach the developed phase of economy by saying that, you can't, burn oil and gas now. Why can't we do that? And why can't we, get to that sort of state of developed economy? Why can't we do that? Of course, we do have a right to do that, and we do have a right to achieve that same sense of development that they have. Lastly, I think, this whole aspect of carbon credits was introduced by the Western countries to then, say, hey, we're going to do something about gas we put out there, the carbon dioxide and the other noxious gases. But again, they converted it into another mafia where there was widespread corruption, and the kind of money that they accumulated in the name of climate change and saving environment was then, laundered to other means like waging wars across the world. So I think it's a very crooked machinery. It's a very, very crooked system that they're trying to impose on other countries. And what the Guyanese president is saying, that despite everything you put through, we are still net zero. Despite everything you put the world through, we are still trying to make it a better place. And the audacity of the white man to lecture him is just something that needs to be called out. Because even today, India, we do not have a moral responsibility to become net zero. We do not have a moral responsibility to stop our emissions, but we still do it anyway because we are good people. We want what's best for the environment, and it's in our nature not to do undo, harm to the environment. And at that point, I think the least of all the West
All right,
can
Rashmi.
do
All right.
is actually.
Okay, some valid points have come our way. This obviously sheds a lot of light, a lot of emphasis on what the Western world needs to change when it comes to their outlook towards what's happening in India and some of the other countries that form a part of this bloc, which is emerging. It's emerging fast. It is perhaps also intimidating and a cause of concern for these Western countries, but it comes out in a negative way.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.